Widely recognized for her broadcasting acumen and her tireless work in the tennis space. Joining me today is Heather Bowler, Executive Director of Communications and Digital Services at ITF, the International Tennis Federation. And she joins me on the On to Something podcast. I'm Bryan Fenley, a commentator for the USTA Pro Circuit and a broadcaster for Tennis Channel. And to take a tennis term, a phrase, pattern of play, if we're going to look at this conversation and where it's going, it's not going to stick to one pattern. We're not just going to hit heavy forehand after heavy forehand and just keep it limited to that. No, we are going to mix things up. We're going to go serve and volley. We're going to talk about her life outside of work. We're going to discuss motherhood and how her life has improved so much since being a mom of 3. Look at her childhood as well. So we're not just going to sit back and hit heavy balls. We're going to come to the net. We're going to hit forehands down the line. We are going to hit approach shots and try to finish balls in the forecourt. We're going to go a lot of different places in this conversation. And in the end, being in her presence, the one thing that will stand out the most to you is that she is very present. And being present has allowed her to have such an optimistic look at life and have such a positive influence on those around her in work and family and friends. All right, enough of me talking. Let's get to the conversation. But before we start that, go subscribe to this channel. We've got some awesome content out there when it comes to folks talking about their human sides, working in sports, working in broadcast and media. You don't want to miss any of these unique conversations. All right, let's get to another one of those unique conversations. Heather, thanks so much for being a part of this. I know I've had quite a few of your friends and colleagues on, and I am stoked. I'm honored to be able to share your story too.
Likewise, Bryan, and it's really nice to meet you.
One of the things I noticed about you is that you have such a positive zest for life. You're very passionate about what you do. And sure, we're going to talk about tennis and everything you're doing on that space as well. But life in general, one of the things I get the vibe from you is that you love life, and especially looking at it on the bright side. What does that look like for you?
Well, I think I've been blessed. I've been working in sport, and before that, I was working in broadcast and in the media world. And at every step of the way, I've just been incredibly fortunate to have traveled all over the world and met some amazing people. And I also have an amazing family. And I've been very lucky, I think, in the sense that I've had a really good balance between my professional and my personal life. So I've always felt really supported, and I've always had a lot of encouragement, I think, around me just to go out and seize opportunities and travel and just make the most of everything that the world has really sort of thrown up in my path. So I consider myself a very fortunate person, and that really is kind of what gets me out of bed every day. And I've always got a lot of projects and a lot on my plates, coming up. But I consider myself very lucky to have that. Sometimes it is a bit of a pressure, and it can be a little stressful and sometimes a little tense. But I think if you always look on the positive, and there's always a solution. It may not be the ideal solution, but there's always a solution. So that's kind of my mindset for everything that I do.
How have you come to be so good at handling the pressure?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think I handle the pressure. I don't know, maybe you should ask that question of people around me, but I think is I always take a really deep breath when I feel that actually I'm a bit pressured about what's going on around me. And I kind of look around me, and I've often seen that when I'm around, with a team or people around me, that actually we all need to focus on solutions. I think I'm a very solutions oriented person, and that kind of focuses you really, really quickly. And I just sort of sit there and think, I just need to still my mind for a minute and think about this. And it's just something that I'm doing. I think it's in my nature to do that. So generally that's just the way I approach everything. If I feel that I'm getting tense, getting a little stressed, I just stop for a second, take a deep breath and have a think, okay, you need to focus on actually what's going on, what's the end goal, and actually how are you going to get there? And that just in itself actually really steadies your thinking. So yeah, that's kind of, it's a very simple, it's not rocket science, and that tends to be very much my rule of thumb in life.
And it's worked out so well for you. How has that rule of thumb outside of the workspace allowed you to really experience life and all it has and all it offers outside of just the business of what you do?
Well, I think it's just, again, as I said earlier, I mean, the kind of job I do and the life that I lead, there's a lot of opportunity to actually experience things and go places. You can plan ahead as much as you like, but you're always going to have, things that come up that are unexpected. And I think I generally just try and say yes to them if I think it's a good thing to do. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it just gives me a lot of confidence, I think, just to know that I can get to where I want to go and where I need to be. So yeah, that's kind of really an ability to be able to say yes to an awful lot of things and have the confidence to know that actually the outcome is going to be positive. It may not be always the expected one, but it'll generally be a positive one.
Who in your inner circle growing up, family, friends, has been there giving you the most confidence in yourself and what you're capable of doing?
I think there are two things actually. I think my parents. I come from a very, very loving family, and I have a brother and a sister, and we're still very close today. And my brother's older; he lives in Los Angeles. My sister, she's my younger sister, so I'm the middle child. And I just had really, really supportive parents, but also I absolutely loved school. I don't know how many people will be listening to this who may or may not agree with me, but I really did. And I really sort of thrived at school, and I was very good at sport. And I think that having a passion for something, be it sport, be it music, being art, just, as long as you have a passion for something, I think it develops so many skills and a really positive mindset. So I think I got into sport very early on. My father played hockey. He was in fencing. My brother and my sister as well. So we were very much encouraged to follow sports, and I was lucky in the fact that the schools that I went to had great facilities, great coaching, and great opportunities to do that. So I just attempted to throw myself wholeheartedly into most of the things that I do, and I think sport was a really big part of it as well.
Why is it that life is so much more fun when you have such a passion for sport and for school and for those things that mean so much to you?
Well, I think, well, number one is, it's a really positive emotion. That's it's such an that sense of achievement, and even little goals. You learn very quickly that little goals and big goals. There is not always big goals, and I think as well it gives you a sense of responsibility, because that often you're part of a team, so you need to show up, and you need to show up with your best games. So it's getting yourself organized and being quite disciplined, and knowing when you've got a lot of different things that you need to actually show up and be disciplined and deliver. And that can be schoolwork, projects, whatever. And you want to do the sport that you love. Kind of get your mind very focused. And so I think that's a real positive.
Having that focus has paid off so much for you over the course of your career. When you're allowing yourself to step outside of the working mindset, what do you like to focus on when it comes to, and we were talking beforehand, before we recorded this conversation, just about how it seems you're so present in your surroundings. Here you are, it's a summer night overseas, and you're explaining to me very much with so much description how beautiful the nights are. To be so present when you have such a taxing job, so much of a commitment, how have you developed that as well?
But I think it's again it's mindset, and perhaps partly nature as well. But I think it's true for anybody, is that you have to sort of learn to stop for a second and just take in your surroundings, and everything that's good in your surroundings. Not everything is going to be perfect and brilliant all the time, but you'll always be able to find one positive thing that's going on around you and just kind of focus in on that for a second and think, this makes me feel good, or this makes me think about something that's positive. So I think having that positive mindset, at every moment, is important. You can't always do it, but it's just, yeah, I mean, I just really like to look around me and just sort of drink up what's going on around me and absolutely observe. I mean, I think part of my nature and part of the job that I do has always been about observing what's going on around me and thinking about it, and actually sort of, what's the best way to actually manage it or react to it, or even potentially having to change a situation with other people around you. It means that you have to have an ability to sort of step back a little bit from what's going on around you and just sort of observe it and drink it up and just assess it. So just, yeah, and I just do that and enjoy the elements that I enjoy. And as I say, as we were saying earlier, I'm in London at the moment. I'm not too far away from Wimbledon. It's very green, it's a lot of grass, there's a lot of tennis, and it's just a really, really lovely, lovely time of the year. So make the most of it.
Observation shows me you have a love for learning. You mentioned that because in discussing growing up, school was such a big part of your discipline and what you loved, and then sport as well. But this curiosity for learning, how does that extend beyond work, beyond what you're doing in the space of media and what you've done in the past in tennis, that allows you to learn about other things that people wouldn't think that you know a lot about, just because you have this underlying love for learning?
Well, I read a lot. I read a lot. I listen a lot to the radio. I'm a huge radio fan, so there's always something, some sort of information, music, or something sort of pouring into my ears or through my eyes at any given moment. And I sort of, when I see something that interests me, I'll generally, follow up and think, okay, is this something that I could potentially go and see, go and experience? And I love traveling, and I have 3 children, and I have my son, youngest son, he's actually living in Prague, and I have a daughter who lives in Amsterdam and a daughter who lives in London. And, I just, for example, I went to Prague last week, and it was literally a bit at the drop of a hat to be able to go for the weekend. And, and if I'm going to go to a city like that, I'm going to think, okay, what can I go and see? What can I go and visit there that I don't know, I've never seen before? So, it's always nice to have that anticipation of actually something new that you don't know about and you learn about. And I think, observation, I think, learning, it just never stops. I think the big talent in life is actually being able then to make really great connections between all these things that you learn, and actually how can this help you, improve your life or improve your performance or improve the way you work. So I think you just never stop, and never stop learning. But I think, reading and thinking, yeah, I do a lot of that and a bit too much talking as well.
Having 3 kids, how has that improved your life?
Well, I would say that's probably the most grounding thing that's ever happened to me. I don't ever seem to recall setting out thinking I was going to have 3 children. I was kind of busy, and I was, thinking, okay, I'm going to travel and I'm going to, do this with my job. I love it. And I didn't really sort of think about sort of settling down and having children. But things happen, you meet someone, you fall in love. And I was very fortunate to do that with a man who were very like-minded. And I think having children for me is the best thing that ever happened to me. And I think I had to grow up very quickly.
Ah.
The responsibility of children, all of a sudden it's no longer about you. You are no longer the center of your own universe. All of a sudden you've got somebody else to think about, and you have to get very organized. So I think it just taught me a lot about sort of organizational skills. It taught me an awful lot as well about bringing up children. Parenting and parenthood is a it's a challenge, but you learn so much about yourself, and you actually learn a lot about what your real values are as well. You can talk a lot about values. in life until you've had children. I think, you know, and become a parent, you know, the actual sort of what you really believe is put to the test. So, yeah, and I found it's very character forming, and it's probably been the, you know, I loved being a mum. I love being a mum, and, you know, my kids, I still think of them as kids, but they're in their 20s now. So it's, they're little big kids, probably.
Yeah, they'll always, part of them will always be your little kids, even though they are all grown up. The values that you said you'd picked up, what are those in going down that road?
I think, first of all, really important is respect. And I think respect actually sort of applies to so many elements of life, personal and professional. And it can be from sort of respecting rules, respecting others, respecting timelines, you know, being on time, respecting promises that you make, you know, and just literally just always again sort of showing up when you say you're gonna show up. So I think respect is a really big value for me. I think loyalty, again, I'm really think loyalty is so important, and these are kind of values that I sort of instilled into my own children, but it's also things that I expect from my team at work as well. You know, I think respect and loyalty, and then the other thing is that so you always give it your best shot, always do your best every day. When you turn up, you've got to turn up and make every day count, so you give it your best shot. And that has really, those I would say were the three values that I've really lived by, you know, my whole life. And I hope my kids have seemed to at least have actually sort of followed the same values. And as I say, and I think that's kind of what I expect from my team at work. It's just always always do your best. And, you know, again, and I think integrity in there is an important one as well. Very, very important, actually.
When you are at your best, when your team is at its best, what does that look like?
I think it's generally when we've had a common goal and we're all working on a probably a very complex project that may not have seemed easy. I mean, a lot of those projects never are, and I think even might have seemed almost a bridge too far. I think working together with a team and actually all sort of working in concert in sort of, you know, well, our coordination is really important. And I find that, you know, achieving a goal, you know, a shared goal as a team, I really enjoy that. I get a huge sense of satisfaction when that happens. And I think the ability to then turn around to that team and everybody's high-fiving and just really pleased that we achieved it and achieved it together. So I'm very much a team player. I'm very much about teamwork, and I'm very fortunate in the job that I have that I really do work with an exceptionally good team. So, you know, they turn up and they always go the extra mile, and that's and they do it with grace and, you know, good humor, and even when they're tired they'll dig deep, and I can consider myself very fortunate that the team, you know, respond in that way. So that's fantastic.
A good team at work, let's say you're on a doubles team. What kind of doubles player are you?
Well, that's actually kind of interesting. I used to play tennis in I used to play doubles with my best friend when I was at school, and it was grass court. So we um we were great, but I think we were just a little bit we were a little bit too polite for one another. So we never really did very well. But we really enjoyed ourselves when we were doing it. And I did an awful lot of running around the court very fast, but I'm not sure that we were particularly effective as tennis players. And so our sports coach kind of took one look at us at some point and said, right, Heather Bowler, you are not playing tennis anymore. You're going to the athletics team. And then my friend, she said, you're going to the swim team. So they basically divided us in tennis and sent us off to do other sports. So, and we both did actually for the school and at university level as well. I went off and did athletics and then trampoline, and she went off and did swimming and diving and did very well. So, you know, maybe that sports coach she was right. I don't know, but she definitely diverted us away from tennis. So I would take from that we're probably not the best doubles team that are around at the time.
So you might not be the best doubles team in the world, but the way in which, like you just said, where you had a coach tried to get you to refocus on something else from tennis, but you still had that big appetite for tennis. And so what you're doing in tennis from a work standpoint now how much could that be tied to showing what you know and what you're capable of and what you can do in the sport, as if it's, hey, maybe my playing career wasn't what I wanted it to be, but this is a way of redeeming myself and finding another major niche in the sport.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know. I would say actually probably a slightly different, perhaps a slightly different tack. I worked at Eurosport, and Eurosport covered, sports television, and they had like 18 hours of live TV coverage a day. So this was, a real sports haven. It was actually pretty wonderful. And tennis was a key sport, but I was actually working across a number of sports. And I think, for me, getting back into tennis actually came through the fact that through Eurosport, I started working with women's tennis, and I started to see, because Eurosport started to invest in women's sports rights, so there was more and more women's sports being aired on the channels, and they did a very good job with them. And I thought there's really something here. There's a real movement around women's sports, and I really believed in that. I really thought this is great, and I loved it, and I particularly enjoyed women's tennis, and sort of knowing the sport and coming back to it. Actually, I felt very comfortable and very at home working in the tennis world, and yeah, so then the opportunity came that I could move from Eurosport and actually move to the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association, and I literally leapt straight in at the deep end, going, yes, please, because I really think the WTA is a marvelous. I think it's a marvelous sort of it's I would say sort of a model for and a role model for any women's sport, in the sense that they've been pioneering it, and they built a profitable business out of women's sport. So anybody who says you can't, well, I think the WTA has always proved them wrong, and that was great. So I really came back into tennis, not through my own potential disappointments or whatever. I came in because I just came into the women's game because I saw that there was that there were some opportunities that were beginning in the women's sports world, and it was an exciting place to be. So that's why I got back into tennis, and I'm stayed in it, and I love it.
What do you love most about it right now?
I think right now, I think every decade of tennis has been marked by some very some legends who have got really strong characters, and people really relate to them. I think what's sort of happening now is that there's a real sort of this new generation's next generation, coming into the tennis world, and it hasn't quite sort of it's like a little bit of like amorphous. It's sort of coming in and out of focus, and it's not fully formed at the moment. And I think that's just a really exciting time in tennis, because we're not quite sure, basically sort of who's going to be up there at the top. But you're seeing these wonderful players that coming up, and the game's interesting, and the women's game is really great. I mean, you're seeing really great matchups, a lot of really good strategic play, coming into the net. It's not just baseline play anymore, it's the power in the serve, and you seeing these amazing players come who stepped on court or picked up a racket in the first place because they were so inspired by Serena and Venus. And then when you see this week, you see Venus Williams at 43 years old, win a title, you're like, hey, yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. So I think it's that the longevity in the careers that the tennis players are having right now is that you've got this spectrum of kind of really young to to players that are actually sort of careers are, to their late 30s. It's amazing. So I'm kind of excited to see where the next generation is, and how who actually sort of crystallizes at the top. And that's kind of interesting to see right now. I'm hedging my bets. I'm not going to, I don't know yet, but I'm enjoying watching it and observing and seeing what's happening right there right now.
As we wrap up this conversation, sure, there's a lot of uncertainty, but we do know when it comes to what tennis is going to look like in the next few years, but there will be so much excitement. There is some certainty, and we know that Heather is going to be making some important decisions and being at the top of her game in the world of sport and the world of tennis, and what she's doing currently right now with the ITF and more. I'm Bryan Fenley. Heather, thank you so much for not only going down the world of tennis with me, but and this is probably a little bit of a different interview that you've ever done, but I loved to hear about your perspective in being a mom and learning about your childhood and how that played such a big role in who you are now and stepping outside of just the work mode just to get that full look of you. And I appreciate you going down that road with me.
Well, I've really enjoyed it, Brian, and thank you so much for inviting me.